games, coaching tips to fit your aims. No more playing.
Welcome to the House of Coaching Deep Dive podcast with Marsha and John. Join them as they explore the wealth of knowledge from leading coaches Steph, Carl, and Hans.
Bring out the best in you. Feel the sky.
Hey, welcome back. So you want to get better at handling tough conversations?
Always room for improvement.
Well, I think you're going to love this.
Oh, lay it on me.
Remember that workshop I took with Hans at ClearMedia?
Yeah, the one that was supposed to be all about sales, but turned out to be way more useful.
Exactly. I took tons of notes because his techniques for, navigating tricky conversations were just brilliant.
So what was the big takeaway?
It was all about staying grounded, not getting swept up in the other person's energy,
Oh, I like that.
He had this great analogy talking about putting on a metaphorical diving suit before you head into a potentially intense interaction. Like you create this protective layer, this second skin.
Second skin. I like the visual. So you don't take things personally or get sucked into any negativity.
Right.
It's not about being detached, but it's more about creating a space where you can respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting all impulsively. And that's something I struggle with.
Oh, me too. And there's actually neuroscience behind why that grounding is so effective.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So when we feel threatened or stressed, right, our amygdala, the little almond-shaped part of the brain,
Oh, I've heard of that.
that triggers that whole fight or flight response.
Mm.
And then suddenly we're just flooded with all this adrenaline and our rational thinking just disappears.
Poof, gone.
Right. But grounding techniques, they can actually help interrupt that automatic stress response. And it brings our prefrontal cortex back online. That's the part of our brain that's all about decision-making, emotional regulation.
It's like hitting the pause button on that emotional roller coaster you were talking about.
Exactly.
So you can choose a better response.
Looking back on some client interactions I've had, I can totally see where that fight or flight response took over.
Yeah. You say things you regret later.
All the time. And that's where Hans introduced this thing called the SLO method.
The SLO method.
It's an acronym. SLOW.
Okay.
It stands for stop, land, evaluate your options, and choose the way to go.
Okay. It sounds kind of simple.
Yeah. Deceptively simple, but so powerful.
How so?
It forces you to be more deliberate, in how you communicate. Instead of just knee-jerk reacting, you create space for conscious choice.
I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah. It all starts with that stop. You hit the brakes before you say something you'll regret.
Okay.
Then you land. You become present, really tune in to what the other person is saying and how they're feeling.
Okay. That makes sense. So you don't get caught up in your own head.
Exactly.
So you're not planning your next brilliant retort while they're still talking.
Right. Then comes the evaluate your options part.
Okay. So what's that about?
That's where you get to ask yourself those important questions. What are all the possible ways I could respond? What are the potential consequences? What outcome am I going for here?
Right. And what response aligns best with, my values and my goals?
Yes. And that's where I think a lot of people, they kind of get stuck.
Yeah. They fall back on those old habits.
They haven't really explored all the different options they have.
They either get defensive or they withdraw or they try and, just win the argument.
It's about expanding your communication toolbox. Choose the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And then finally you get to choose the way to go.
Right. Make a conscious choice based on everything you've considered. And that sense of agency of having a choice in how you respond, it can be so empowering.
Oh, absolutely.
It shifts you from feeling like a victim to feeling like you've got the power to shape how the conversation goes.
Take back control of the situation.
Exactly. You're steering the interaction in a more positive direction.
I love that. I'm thinking of that Viktor Frankl quote. Between stimulus and response, there's a space.
Yes.
And in that space is our power to choose our response.
Yes. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Oh, that's good stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
Speaking of shifting the dynamic of a conversation.
Yeah.
Hans talked about this really cool technique he called the dream question.
The dream question. Okay.
It's all about shifting away from problems and focusing on solutions. It's a way to uncover hidden needs and desires.
I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Okay, so imagine you're talking to a client who's hesitant about something. You can ask them, imagine we're 6 months down the road and everything is working exactly as you hoped it would.
Okay. Yeah.
How would you know? What would have changed?
Wow, I like that. It takes the pressure off.
Right. You're inviting them to picture that positive future state.
It's almost like you're planting a seed in their mind.
Yes. And it's not just about sales. I can see this being powerful in personal relationships.
Ooh, yeah.
Or even when working with teams. Imagine asking your partner, if we had a magic wand and could create our ideal relationship a year from now, what would it look like?
I love that.
Or asking your team, okay, fast forward to the end of this project, we were successful, what did we achieve together?
It's so good, yeah. It invites everyone into that space of possibility.
It really does.
You know, that can be so powerful for unlocking creativity and motivation.
Absolutely. This is already so much to unpack.
I know, right?
And I feel like we're just scratching the surface of everything Hans covered.
There's always more to explore.
But one thing that really stood out to me was his emphasis on maintaining a positive mindset, especially when you're dealing with negativity or resistance.
That is so important.
Because our internal state really can impact the whole energy and direction of an interaction.
It's like that saying, what you focus on expands.
Yeah.
If we're dwelling on negative thoughts, that's all we're going to see.
Oh, totally. I've definitely gone into meetings feeling stressed and anxious.
Oh, yeah. You can feel the energy in the room.
And it just never goes well.
Yeah.
But when I can manage to shift my mindset to a more positive place,
then magic can happen.
it's amazing how differently things unfold.
Totally agree. It's not about, pretending everything's perfect or denying the negative emotions.
Right. It's about reframing them.
Yes. Reframe them in a way that allows you to move forward.
Like seeing a customer complaint as an opportunity.
Exactly. Or, when somebody criticizes your work, instead of getting all defensive.
See it as a chance to learn and grow.
That's the spirit. It's about focusing on the solution, not the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one practical way to maintain that positive mindset is to practice gratitude.
Gratitude is so powerful. It's so easy to get caught up in what's going wrong, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
But when you intentionally focus on what you're grateful for, it can shift your whole perspective.
Yeah, and it helps you approach challenges with more resilience.
Absolutely. Even the smallest things can make a difference.
A beautiful sunset.
A delicious meal.
A kind word from a friend.
Exactly. It's training your brain to focus on the good stuff.
I like that.
And that actually leads us perfectly into the next part of our conversation. We're going to talk about techniques for steering conversations back on track.
Because sometimes things just go off the rails.
They do. We'll be back to explore those strategies and some surprisingly effective ways to handle those,
The difficult people.
Exactly.
Hey there, awesome listener. Want to know something exciting? In this episode, Marsha and John give away 20 free copies of the amazing book Beyond Words. Head over to podcast.thehouseofcoaching.com right now to claim yours. Remember, once they're gone, they're gone.
Bring out the best in you.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how important our mindset is when we communicate.
It's like setting the stage for a positive interaction.
Right, exactly. But sometimes, no matter how grounded and positive you are, conversations can still go off on tangents.
It's like you hit a detour. You're cruising along and suddenly you're off course.
Yeah, and that's where Hans's steering techniques come in.
Ah, yes. He talked about subtle redirection.
Right. Exactly. It's not about manipulating the conversation.
Right.
It's more like gently nudging it back in the right direction.
I like that. Nudging, not forcing. He gave that example about using a little story or a well-placed question.
To kind of shift the focus.
It's almost like building a bridge. You're connecting where the conversation went off track back to the main point.
Yeah. And it's got to be tactful. You don't want to make the other person feel like their thoughts are being dismissed.
Absolutely. It's about respect. Sometimes it's about reframing things, too. Like if someone gets stuck in the weeds, you can say, I hear your concern about the details, but let's zoom out for a second.
Right. Get that bigger picture. Help everyone stay focused and productive.
Okay, so this next one was fascinating.
Oh.
Mirroring. Hans talked about mirroring as a way to build rapport.
Oh, yeah. That's classic neurolinguistic programming, the idea that we naturally connect with people who are like us.
Right. So if you subtly match their body language, their tone of voice,
Even their words.
you create this unconscious sense of connection.
Exactly. It's not about being a copycat. It's more like,
Finding a harmony.
yes. Like if they're leaning forward and they're speaking excitedly,
Yeah.
you might subtly mirror that to create that connection.
I actually tried this in a recent negotiation. The other person was speaking really softly, so I lowered my voice to match. It felt a little weird at first, but
Did it work?
it really did. It shifted the whole atmosphere. Things felt less confrontational.
That's awesome. It's amazing how those little adjustments can make such a difference.
Speaking of subtle techniques, Hans also talked about pre-framing.
Oh, yeah. Setting the stage. You're kind of influencing their expectations before you even say what you want to say.
It's like planting seeds, right? You create this context that makes your message more persuasive.
It's brilliant. Like if you're about to pitch an idea that you know might be met with resistance,
You could pre-frame it by talking about the challenges you're facing as a team.
emphasize the need for fresh ideas.
You're basically making them more receptive.
I love that.
Okay, and then there's the power of words.
Oh, yes, those power words that pack a punch.
Hans said they're like spices. They add flavor. Instead of saying good, you say outstanding.
Instead of important, you say critical.
Those little tweaks can change how people perceive your message.
It's about choosing words that really resonate with your audience, right? But sometimes the most powerful words aren't the big flashy ones.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Hans said vulnerability can be really powerful.
Right. We often think we need to project this image of strength.
But sometimes letting your guard down is the best way to connect.
It's counterintuitive.
It is.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it. When you're willing to be vulnerable, you're saying, hey, I'm human.
I make mistakes. I don't have all the answers.
Exactly. And people respond to that authenticity. It builds trust.
It's about being real, not perfect.
That leads us right into dealing with difficult people.
Because let's face it, we all encounter them.
We'll be back in part 3 to learn Hans's strategies for dealing with even the most challenging personalities.
Ready to unlock hidden potential in yourself and others? Discover the transformative power of NLP at the House of Coaching. Visit www.houseofcoaching.com and take the first step toward mastering the psychology of excellence.
But what about those times when you're dealing with someone who's just, difficult?
Ah, yes. The difficult people. Those folks who seem to thrive on conflict, push our buttons, or just make communication feel like an uphill battle.
We all know them.
But here's the thing. Hans emphasized that these difficult behaviors are often a cover for something else.
Like what?
Well, he said it's often a sign of unmet needs or some kind of underlying insecurity.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, their behavior might be frustrating, but it's not really about us. It's about them and what they're going through.
Exactly. And when you can understand that, it becomes easier to approach these situations with more compassion. It doesn't mean you condone their behavior, but you can see them as a human being struggling with something, and that can change everything.
It takes some of the emotional charge out of it.
It does. But Hans also emphasized that it's super important to set boundaries, especially with people who are demanding, disrespectful, or manipulative.
Boundaries are tough.
They are. We often avoid them because we don't want to cause conflict or hurt someone's feelings, but having healthy boundaries is really about self-care and self-respect.
So how do you do that?
Well, Hans talked about the broken record technique. You just calmly and repeatedly state your boundary.
Even if they try to argue.
Especially if they try to argue, or guilt trip you, or manipulate you, you just keep repeating your boundary. It's a simple but powerful way to get your point across.
I like that. No need to get into a big debate.
Right. And another key thing when you're dealing with difficult people is to detach from their emotional state.
Oh, that's so hard.
Yeah.
It's like their negativity is contagious.
It can be. But it's important to remember that you have a choice in how you respond. You don't have to get sucked into their drama.
It's like putting up that second skin we talked about earlier.
Yes. You create that protective layer that helps you stay grounded and centered even when they're losing it. And sometimes, honestly, the best thing to do is just disengage.
Walk away.
Yeah, if someone's being abusive or disrespectful, you have every right to remove yourself from the situation. You don't have to tolerate that. And on the topic of challenging interactions, Hans also shared some really helpful stuff about navigating conflict in general.
Because let's face it, conflict is unavoidable.
It is. It's part of life. But it doesn't have to be destructive. Hans said that conflict can actually be an opportunity, a chance to learn and grow and build stronger relationships.
If you approach it the right way.
Exactly. One of his big things was the power of asking why.
Ooh, I like that.
It's about getting curious about the other person's perspective. Instead of just arguing your point, you try to understand their underlying needs and motivations.
You're looking for that common ground.
Yeah. He told this great story about mediating a conflict between two colleagues who were always at odds. And by asking them each to explain why the issue was so important to them, he discovered that they actually had a shared goal.
They just had different ideas about how to get there.
Right. And once they understood each other's motivations, they were able to find a compromise.
So powerful. Just taking the time to really listen and understand can make such a huge difference.
It really can. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into communication mastery, from staying grounded and setting boundaries to navigating conflict and dealing with those difficult personalities.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. And if you're ready to take your communication skills to the next level, I highly recommend checking out Hans's work.
His website is www.thehouseofcoaching.com, right?
That's right. He's got tons of great workshops and resources.
It's been great exploring all of this with you.
Likewise.
And for everyone listening, the real magic happens when you take these ideas and put them into action.
So pick one thing that resonated with you and try it out this week.
You might be amazed at the difference it makes. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.
You've been listening to the House of Coaching podcast, where real transformation happens one conversation at a time. If today's insights sparked your interest, hit that like button and subscribe. You would not want to miss what's coming up next as Marsha and John take you behind the scenes of more transformative sessions with our master coaches. Visit thehouseofcoaching.com, connect with us on LinkedIn, and join a community of forward-thinking professionals who are reshaping the future of business.
Wake up with fire in your veins. John and Marsha spark the flames. Coaching tips to fit your aims. No more playing simple games. Unlock the power deep inside. Let the House of Coaching be a guide. Run the race with giant strides. No more reasons left to hide. Bring out the best in you. Feel the sky turn blue. Every challenge push on through. Bring out the best.